This is John Nugent.
I'm Sam Long.
And I'm Ron Peters.
Welcome to the After Class Podcast.
Because the best conversations happen
after class.
Welcome back to another episode. This is Sam, and if you're tuning in to hear more about Satan, you're going to be sorely disappointed. We've exhausted that, we think, at least for the moment.
And thank you so much that we have.
Yes.
Although it was good. I thought it was a good series.
So we're going to move on today, but before we get to that, we have a few things to take care of. First and foremost, for those who've been waiting for all sorts of swag from the After Class podcast, we have our first thing. They're stickers. So if you've not picked up a sticker, we have, we started with 500. We're probably down to 400 by now, maybe less. But we have those available. If you want to contact one of us, we'll get them in your hands. But we want to give a real special thanks to Great Lakes Christian College, who is not only the home for this podcast and our employer, but they put up the money for the stickers and are very supportive of what we're doing here. So thanks to Great Lakes Christian College, and support us, support them, and get your sticker, and you can put it wherever is visible, I guess.
In a highly visible place, please, because this is a way for us to get a little bit more exposure. We're trying to raise awareness of the podcast and let people know that we're out there. In fact, in addition to that, maybe we should mention that we're looking to get reviews on iTunes. Right, we're looking for our listeners. If you are willing, and if you like the podcast, which if you're listening, I'm guessing that you do, if you would help us out. Actually, we're going to sound a little bit like a telethon here, but we're looking to get 101 reviews by 10/1, if you like that. We really like to get as many reviews on iTunes as we can. So
that's October 1st for those keeping score.
10/1, October 1st, right. And so if you would please go into iTunes and give us a rating. 5 stars is what we're looking for. And if you'd even be willing to give us a brief review, that would really help us out. That would increase our awareness, the exposure. When people are searching iTunes, the more ratings we have, the more positive ratings we have, the sooner we come up in their searches. So if you're willing to do that, we'd appreciate that as well.
Yeah, and if you don't have iTunes, Google Play doesn't give us a nice way to rate people, do they?
Sadly, no.
So you can go to Facebook and do a review there.
Yeah.
Spotify now also.
We're on Spotify.
Liking our YouTube page and
we're on YouTube.
What have you.
Yeah. We're everywhere. We are blanketing the media.
Okay. So along with our kind of thanking Great Lakes for the way they've sponsored this ministry, we want to plug in a Great Lakes event. October 9 through 12 is Restoration Appreciation Week. And that's a week where we have guest speakers come to campus. And on Tuesday, Jim Amstutz will be speaking on the non-instrumental churches of Christ and his own experiences among them. On Friday, we have Jerry Harris, the editor at Christian Standard, who will be speaking on restoration and racial reconciliation. And the purpose of this week is just to raise awareness among the Christian churches of Christ, restoration movement folk of their history.
Yeah.
We're trying to raise awareness for our students here, but we bring in guest speakers, and we hope that people from off campus will come to campus. Both the Tuesday and the Friday session are at 11 a.m. at the Doty Center. So if you live nearby, or even within driving distance, we encourage you to join us. On Friday, there's going to be a lunch afterwards and conversation with both speakers, so it's a great time to interact. And for the first time on October 14, we are recognizing Restoration Appreciation Sunday. Mm-hmm. So ask your church, if you're part of the Christian Church or Church of Christ, what are they doing for Restoration Appreciation Sunday? We'd like you to find some concrete way during your Sunday morning worship service to acknowledge and recognize the history of the movement that is behind the existence of your church.
Yeah.
So we don't become people with amnesia about our own heritage. And go to Great Lakes' website, look up advancement, and find there's a page dedicated to Restoration Appreciation. And we have resources to help you celebrate Restoration Appreciation Sunday, including a brief video clip produced by one of our students.
Yeah, pretty cool video from what I hear.
Shout out to Luke Mason for doing a great job and winning the student presentation contest. And as a result, his work is going to be aired in congregations all over the state and maybe region. So,
I think we should say that if you have no idea what John was just talking about in regard to the restoration movement, we're doing a couple of podcasts in a couple of weeks that talk about that. So if you're lost in what he just said, just wait, be patient, and we'll fill you in on that, right?
Exactly.
Absolutely.
And on that note, with regard to topics, I'm going to introduce today's topic, and really the topic that's going to be guiding our conversations probably for the next several weeks. And that is, we're going to be working from John's book, Endangered Gospel. Back when we first started the podcast, I brought this up and said, man, I think that this would be a really great framework within which to have conversations. And at that time, we decided we were going to push it off till this fall. And now that we're here at into the fall in our new semester at the college, we thought now's the time to dive in there. And so we're going to take the individual chapters of John's book and use them as a launching point for the upcoming conversations. That doesn't mean that we're going to be slavishly following that. If topics come up that we think are hot topics, then we're going to jump into those, or anything else that comes up that we think, man, we're going to take a break from Endangered Gospel to focus on that, then that's what we're going to do. And we still have a long list of topics that we've accumulated from listeners who have posted to Facebook or sent us emails and said, hey, could you talk about this? We're keeping a running list, and there might come a point where we feel like there's one we want to jump into. But going forward, that's the plan. We're going to be working from John's book, Endangered Gospel. If you haven't picked up a copy, I highly recommend it. It's a great book. I've read it. John and I talked a lot about the contents of the book before he actually wrote it, and it was something I was really on board with, and I was excited when he decided to write it. And so if you want to pick up a copy to be able to follow along the things we're talking about, I certainly recommend that you do that.
Yeah, and we're not just talking about the book. This isn't one giant book review. It's really the chapters of the book are giving us topics to talk about.
Yeah.
And we're going to try not to just work through the book. I think that could be kind of a pedantic formula that wouldn't be all that interesting. But the book has a lot of diverse topics in it, many topics that some of you have requested that we have discussions on, there are chapters on. Mm-hmm. And so it's going to naturally lead to talking about a wide range of topics. And again, we're not reviewing the book. We're not going through each chapter. It's kind of like a table of contents of a laundry list of topics we're going to talk about.
Yep.
So.
Each one is a launching point for us to have a conversation without necessarily talking about the contents in detail. So this is not like a book study.
Right. And so we're going to start with the big picture of what the book actually is about, and this idea of what is the church's place in the world, in God's mission in the world, like what are we here for? And the first chapter, I stopped at the first chapter because I was really engaged with the manatees. I thought, there's more important things in this world than me doing work. I need to save the manatees.
I had no idea that the manatees were in such a crisis. I mean, it has raised my awareness of the manatee crisis. Yeah. I got to give you credit, John. I had no idea.
I do what I can.
So if you get nothing else of this podcast, save the manatees.
Right.
If you have no idea what I'm talking about, you should probably read the first chapter of the book.
Read the first chapter.
So once I got past that, the questions that John laid out are important ones. Has God called us to fix this world? And is fixing the world what it means to be salt and light in the world? And because churches kind of go back and forth with this, and what is the church's role in this world? And then, of course, how do we fix it if we're trying to fix it? And we were going to do a bit of a discussion about a kind of a hot take thing, but we thought it wasn't worth spending a whole episode. But lately, we've seen that President Trump has come out and he's having it was a luncheon or something with some of his constituency,
luncheon.
Yep.
And he's imploring these ministers, these preachers, these church people to go back to their churches and to encourage people to get out and vote this November. And the quote that he gives it's an important one in this discussion. He says, it's not a question of like or dislike, I guess, of other people. It's a question that they, I'm assuming he means Democrats, will overturn everything that we've done. And then he says, you have to hopefully get out and get people to support us. If you don't, that will be the beginning of ending everything that you've gotten. There's so much bound up in that to unpack, and we don't have the time to. But the overarching implication is because of the government, because of us, you as Christians are going to succeed. Mm-hmm. And that is an idea that is in a lot of churches. I remember when I was when I was in Kentucky during election season, I would have just calm debates about politics, and over it was, we need to make sure we get a Republican president in there because he or she, it was he obviously, is going to be responsible for putting Supreme Court justices on the Supreme Court, and maybe 2 of them, and maybe we can get abortion overturned. As though that's going to change the whole world in their minds. And it's not just that. It's just not that issue. There's lots of issues where we look to government to fulfill our Christian calling.
Yeah.
And I say all that to say this book challenges that idea. It says, what are we supposed to do and how are we supposed to do it? Are we supposed to change the world? Are we supposed to change the world through legislation? Are we supposed to change the world by standing up for a certain candidate who then work on our behalf? How does it all work? And does it even matter? Is that what we're supposed to be focusing on? And so that's kind of the big picture of the book, going back and forth. I'm sure John can correct me on the points I've missed, which are plenty, because that's a pretty bigger topic than what I've just laid out. But what is the gospel message? Is it that we are here to make the world a better place? Or is it that we're supposed to get people to heaven? And we'll talk more about that, I think, in future episodes. But do you want to jump in and correct some of those things?
Yeah, no, I think you give a good illustration by bringing up the Trump thing. And that whole conversation presupposes something, that what Trump is trying to accomplish with his administration and what those Christian leaders are trying to accomplish within their congregations is the same thing.
Right.
Like they're both, basically we are involved in trying to accomplish the same thing, yet we have different means. You have your churches and your pulpits, and I have political office and the ability to change and enact legislation. And that's the question. He speaks to them as if they're partners with a common agenda. Mm-hmm. And that's the question of the book. Is that true?
Yeah.
Does the church and the world, or world structures, do they have the same basic agenda in this world? And the assumption that they do is not just a difference of opinion about nuance of the church's place. The gospel is on the line. And the full title of the book is Endangered Gospel, How Fixing the World is Killing the Church.
Yeah,
there's a big mission drift involved of what we should be doing with our time, energy, and resources, and it's rooted, I believe, in a fundamental misunderstanding of the gospel message itself.
Yeah. I think that Trump's assertion in that particular message is that through his administration, the church has gained ground in its mission. That somehow we've achieved something. And like you said, Sam, I heard so many Christians who, at least read or leading right Christians who used the Supreme Court as an argument. A lot of people who are really turned off by Trump as a person, his character, said, but with this president, we can gain ground in the Supreme Court, as if somehow gaining that ground was synonymous with the church achieving its mission. And I found that very disturbing to hear that kind of an argument being made, that somehow using the levers of power that the world has allows the church to accomplish its mission. And I don't think that I don't want to talk down or to denigrate people who think that way. I think that broadly speaking, at least in the United States, the church probably has not done a very good job of differentiating between the world on the outside and the church and helping people to understand. I think a lot of Christian leaders don't fully appreciate what the Bible has to say about God's kingdom being in this world, but not of the world. And I think what we want to do here is to continue a conversation that is certainly happening in a lot of places, to say we need to take a step back and really evaluate this kind of methodology that a lot of Christians seem to want to employ.
Yeah, and just because we use the Trump example, this isn't a book about politics. I mean, actually, it is a book about politics, but it's not about U.S. politics. It's not about the current election season or the next election season. It's fundamentally a book about the gospel and the church's mission. And different ways of interacting with politics presuppose an understanding of the gospel and presuppose a sense of mission. But that's not really what the focus is going to be about. It's going to be just getting into the Bible story. what is the Bible story? What role does God have for his people within that story? And what does it mean for us to be enfolded into that story in baptism? And now is really a timely it's a timely moment to talk about this because the church is in a place fundamentally now that's different than where they've been in the past. I would say when I was growing up, it seemed like there was two kinds of Christians. And one kind of Christian believed that the church's nature and mission was to focus on saving people's souls.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And I'd say the conservative branches of the church, evangelicals, really prided themselves on being salvation-centered, really concerned with where people go after they die. It's our business to save souls. And then it's not our job to kind of fix people's needs, cure social ills, change society. Right? Among conservative circles, it was very salvation and soul-driven. On the other hand, in more liberal circles, it was the exact opposite. The church should be an agent in this world for enacting social change. That the 8th century prophets were all about social change. Jesus was all about social change. The church, to be relevant, to be on task with its mission, should be about changing social structures. And you kind of knew what kind of church you're going into by their approach towards social issues or salvation of soul issues. They were clean, easy divides. Is that your guys' memory of how things used to be?
Yeah, I mean, it's certainly my memory. And growing up in really like a small town, farming community town, lots of small town churches, I can say without a doubt that the emphasis was on salvation. That was our goal. The gospel is you're a sinner who needs to be saved, and Jesus is the one who sacrificed in order to facilitate your salvation. And once you are saved, then you are in with God, and you can count on the fact that when judgment comes, you won't go through that judgment. You'll go to heaven someday. I mean, that's pretty much, in a nutshell, the gospel message that I grew up hearing and believing myself. The more, like you said, the more socially conscious side, I didn't encounter that, but it's really more the kind of community that I grew up in. But no question, on the more conservative evangelical side, that's what the gospel was all about, without a doubt.
Yeah, I can echo that as well. Growing up in the Christian church, more conservative areas, it was all about salvation of souls. It really wasn't until I began interacting with other denominations that, whatever you want to term them, non-evangelical or whatever, that where they were very focused on these things, the social type issues. And so that was mostly actually when I went to a pretty conservative area in Tennessee, I started interacting with more Presbyterians and things like that. Like, they care about far more than that. And then you get this strange thing where, Christians were always, good Christians were always Republicans, right?
Right, yeah.
But then I went down there and no, they're really good Christians because they care about people. They're Democrats, as though there's like this huge distinction between these two. Yeah. And it's not about party. It's like, so what are we supposed to do? Do we save souls, or do we save people from getting kicked out of their apartment because they can't pay the bill? Mm-hmm. And I think the answer is yes. We try to do both. So
yeah, and that was my experience as well when I was in growing up in New York, and then in Michigan going to school. To be Christian was to be Republican, and then when I was at Duke at a mainstream Protestant denomination, to be Christian was to be Democrat.
Yeah,
because Democrats cared about people's lives, their social standing, the oppressed. And liberating people who are in various forms of physical and social bondage. And so it was a culture shock for me to kind of experience that radical shift. But that was then. I think nowadays, I think there has been a significant shift. Evangelicals have kind of revisited their Bibles and realized that you cannot be in the soul-saving business while ignoring people's social condition. God did not ignore people's social condition in the Old Testament. The prophets really railed against Israel for ignoring people's social condition in the latter Old Testament period, and Jesus went right after it from the beginning. So this false dichotomy between caring for souls or caring for bodies or social conditions has largely broken down. And I think nowadays most people care about not only saving souls, but feel like the church has a responsibility to be socially aware, socially active, doing something positive to improve people's living conditions. Is that?
No, I think that is fair. Yeah, without a doubt.
I think the difficulty comes with how does that get accomplished? And that's where it comes to, well, we need the government to take care of people, or like, no, we don't need the government to take care of people. And that's where the back and forth now goes, where sure, they should be helped, but maybe they should also help themselves a little bit, and on it goes.
Yeah. So now that conservatives are kind of, there's been a unity, I think, in the church. Conservatives, political conservatives and theological conservatives are kind of coming to a common place of realizing the gospel has social implications. And at such great progress, I think, for the church is not to be a pie in the sky, salvation oriented, but like, boy, this is a God who cares about this world and he cares about life in this world. And Jesus came to give people freedom from oppression, from life in this world, or through life in this world. It's been great progress, but at the same time, now that people are more socially aware, and they haven't been studying and thinking this way for a long time, they've been gravitating, I think, excuse me, toward worldly ways of caring about social status or social progress or social liberation. In other words, they've been ignoring that issue for so long, they become biblically illiterate on how to address the issue, and they're looking toward the political left or the religious left and saying, that's how we do it. We do it the way they've been doing it for such a long time, which is influence the powers and principalities in this world, change legislation, change status and situation. And so now we have a swing of focus. And in the process, the distinctive kind of witness we see in the Bible is getting lost a bit.
Yeah, I think that what happens so often, whether you're on the political right or political left, cultural right, cultural left, what happens with Christians is we see people who are, for all intents and purposes, outside of the kingdom in that they do not share our commitment to the lordship of Jesus Christ, seeking first, God's kingdom and his righteousness. They don't have that commitment. And yet, they're trying to accomplish certain things that, at least at a very superficial level, look like the same things we want to accomplish, or they use a lot of the same terminology, or they have a value system that maybe even does align with our own, but it actually doesn't come from the same place. Our value system comes from the recognition of the lordship of Jesus Christ. Again, seeking first God's kingdom and his righteousness. And some people might have a value that is similar or the same as that, but it doesn't actually grow out of a sense of God's kingship or his lordship. And we interpret them as allies, that these are people who are committed to the same end that we're committed to. Our ends grow out of a sense of kingdom commitment, of living out the kingdom of God. They're not actually looking to bear witness to the kingdom and what they do. And I don't know that Christians fully appreciate that at times, and it creates a sense of allegiance or alliance that, and once you align with people like that, you begin to see their methodologies, and this is where I think we're going. You begin to see that they're using these methods to accomplish this end. That sounds good to me. Let's work together on that. Instead of going, wait a minute, maybe we even do have the same objective, but God says go about it this way, and they're doing it a different way. And the Bible has a lot to say about looking to the nations to accomplish a particular goal, and how God says, no, that's not how we do it.
Yeah, I'd say that although you paint kind of a nice picture where there's been movement, I'm not sure there's been that much movement all the time. For a lot of places, still the gospel message is still very narrow, and so yes, first we need to get people saved so they can go to heaven, and well, I guess we can help them as we are able, and at the same time, we'll help them by perhaps pawning off the responsibility to someone else, whether it be a government or a nonprofit or what have you. There's still not that sense that we need to do more than get people saved, I think, in a lot of, especially particularly conservative churches. And so, again, both sides, they're still seeing a misunderstanding of the gospel. and what the gospel actually is. And so it's frustrating. And that's why I think there's not as much unity in churches as we wish there would be. So that's all.
Yeah. Yeah, my observation is probably in what I see among books on the church.
Sure.
A lot of what scholars are producing. There's a lot more common ground to recognize the gospel does have social implications. And you're not taking the whole gospel seriously unless you're taking social issues seriously as well. And so the question is the way to take social issues seriously to make it one's agenda to make this world a better place, or to fix this world, or change this world? That's really the defining question of the text. Is the Bible's way of taking social issues seriously to attempt to fix the whole world? And that's where, when I look to the Bible, I don't see that emphasis.
Agreed.
I see an emphasis on social concerns being at the forefront and at the heart, really, of Israel and the church's nature and mission, but not in a fix the whole world kind of sense. And one popular expression of this, I don't know if you guys have ever heard the Matthew West song called "Do Something."
I don't know if I have or not. Maybe I haven't. I'm just not remembering.
Yeah, Matthew West is a very popular level Christian radio kind of artist. And he has this song called "Do Something," where he just lists all these terrible things in the world. And, I don't listen to the song much, so I don't have that list memorized. But just think of things like sex trafficking, homeless people, unclean water supplies, the list of things that are going wrong in the world, the brokenness out there. And he says it's not enough for us to do nothing. It's time for us to do something. That the presence of brokenness in this world requires the church to act, to fix this world, to change this world, to make it a better place. And that sentiment that he captures pretty well in his song is a sentiment that's starting more and more to crop up in literature and in podcasts and in websites about the church. Let's get out there and do something. Yeah. But let's not just holy huddle in our congregations. Let's find out where the world is broken and go there and fix it.
So I struggle with that framing of it a little bit because, on the one hand, I don't know the song, but the idea of doing something as opposed to doing nothing is laudable because there's plenty of churches doing nothing. But I think the problem is when you get to what does it mean to fix the world? Are we to do something in order to fix it or because it's the right thing? Like, what's the end goal? And that's really, I think, a lot of what the book addresses is why do we do any of the things we do? Why is there charity? Why do all these things exist? Why do we actually love people? And so I think really for me it comes down to what does it mean to fix the world? And is that what churches should be doing or not? And if not, then what should they be doing instead? Right? And it's because fixing the world, we all know it's broken. But we have these ideas in the Bible. We of like, we wish heaven or like bring the kingdom here to earth. We have these images of restoration that we see in like Revelation and other places where like that sounds great. I would love to live in that sort of utopia. Wouldn't you all? I mean, wouldn't the whole world? And so why not? Why is that not a good aspiration? Why is that not something the church should aspire to?
Yeah,
and that's an actual question. I mean, why isn't it?
Yeah, the slogan, "Let's change the world." I mean, that is so invigorating. And I hear it so often. I hear it repeated so often in popular Christian music. I routinely hear it in sermons. I just heard it in a sermon this week. Let's go out and change the world. And it really does. It riles people up. It's like, because we know the world is broken. We know how bad it is when we look around. We see it on the news and we see it around us. And we want this world to be a better place. It's an understandable impulse. And so let's go out and change the world. And in fact, a few years ago, there was a newer Bible series that I think aired on the History Channel. I can't remember for sure. But I made sure to watch it all the way through as a Bible scholar because I wanted to be able to talk intelligently about it. But at one point, Jesus is talking to one of his disciples in the series, not from the Bible, but in the series, and he leans over to his disciple and says, "We're going to change the world." And you see how pervasive that slogan is. But the question that comes into my mind is that our mission? To me, that's the question. What is the mission of God's people? God defines the mission, and we go out and we act upon that definition. And so does fix the world or change the world align with the mission that we have been given by God? And as you've already teased us on that, John, I'm not sure it does, because I can't really find anything in the Bible that seems to suggest that that's our mission.
Yeah. And to answer Sam's question, I think making this world a better place, changing this world for the better, there's not a thing wrong with that. Yeah. There's not a thing wrong with that. Matter of fact, anyone who wants to spend time doing that, have at it. And that is such a better use of your time than sitting home, binging Netflix, or sitting on your phone, scrolling through Facebook posts, or whatever ways we just waste time feeding ourselves with the various forms of social media and the entertainment industry, or just sleeping away a good time. Like, man, a good hobby would be making the world better. Like finding things wrong in your town, in your place that could be better, and being part of the solution. So there is absolutely nothing wrong with that. Matter of fact, there's lot that is right about that. It's such a good use of time. The question is whether that is what God set apart Israel to do, and what Jesus called the church to do, walking in the steps of Israel. That's the question, because if that's not our calling from God, and we use a lot of our time, energy, and resources to do it, then the issue is not that we're doing something wrong. The issue is that we're not sufficiently doing the right thing that God called us to do.
Exactly.
And that's really the question of the book. What is the thing that God has called us to do? And you can't answer that question without surveying the whole Bible story.
Amen.
And so part of what we're going to do in this series is kind of walk through what was going on in this world before God started to create a set-apart people through Abraham and his descendants. What was going on in the world? When God did call Abraham and his descendants to mission, to be a blessing to the nations, what was he shaping them to do? What was he equipping, empowering them to do? But there was a neat book that came out a few years ago by James Davison Hunter called To Change the World. And it became really a hit among scholars. Hunter is a sociologist, and he's observing how change happens in the world. He's not writing, first of all, as a Christian theologian, although he is a believer. But his motive for writing this book is to discuss and analyze how change takes place in the world that we live in. And he came to a conclusion that when I heard it the first time, I thought it was really scandalous. And it disagreed with me at a visceral level. The conclusion he reached, and he lays this out, this really long sociology book. The conclusion he reached and argues for and demonstrates pretty well is that the change doesn't happen in this world the way people often think it does. We often think of change as happening when heroic individuals, underdogs, rally together and get inspired and just start doing something small in their town or their place, and then dominoes start to fall, and all of a sudden, it's a better world.
I call it the Mighty Duck syndrome.
Yes.
For those who have not seen the Mighty Ducks, you're probably under the age of 50.
That's true. Rather, he says, instead of that being the way change really happens in the world, he argues that change happens when powerful people in high-profile positions of social influence, like politicians, like educators who teach in high-profile universities, and wealthy people, and entertainers who have the public eye and ear of the masses. When power blocks like that rally around a cause and use all their network of resources to champion that cause and to follow it through and back it with their money and their publicity and their legislation, that is how change happens in the world in which we live. That's the thesis of his book. It's not the Mighty Duck syndrome. It is the people of power and positions of influence in the world who get things done. What do you guys think when you hear that thesis?
Well, it definitely grates against the grassroots idea that we've all, like you said, we've all grown up with, like, the underdog, all the rest, because most of us are that. We are the grassroots people. We don't have influence or anything of that nature, so it gives you hope. Like, oh, we can do things, and he comes along and says that, like, oh, well, thanks. I guess I'm a nobody. I guess I'm never going to do anything in this world. But we grow up, and we're children are told you can do anything you want, and you can change this world, and over and over.
Make a difference.
The fact is, according to him, no, you can't. Maybe
you wish
if
you could.
If you were positioned properly, if you have the right connections, if you work your way and get to the top, then maybe you can. So it's kind of a bucket of cold water on any hope for the future for people like me. But at the same time, I look around history and like that's probably right. These people usually don't come out of nowhere who make changes, who become politicians. Like, we may not know them, but they are known commodities and quantities in Washington or wherever else. And so even we were talking, I think, in the hallway one day about even like Martin Luther King Jr. Like, he wasn't just a guy from nowhere. He has education. He had connections. He was a known quantity. And so I'm sure they exist, that there are people who, don't do any, that are not known and do something, but they're few and far between. Change happens at the top level. And so my reaction is, oh, that stinks, but it may be right from a worldly perspective.
Yeah.
Yeah, the cynic in me hears that and goes, yep, that's probably right. The idealist wants to say, no, it's the grassroots people. It's the people who have little power, who come together in a large numbers and rally together, who now become a powerful bloc, who bring about change. The idealist would want to say that. But like I said, the cynic in me says, yeah, that sounds about right. And I'm not enough of a historian to be able to look at the evidence and evaluate his thesis. And so I can't do that. But it kind of passes the sniff test to me that, yeah, that sounds about right. And I think what makes that very difficult for a lot of people to accept is not the basic premise of the thesis, but it undermines attempts to get large blocks of people moving. If you begin to tell people, yeah, it's only the well-connected and the powerful and the elite who can bring about change, then the grassroots level people are going to go, well, then my contribution doesn't mean much, so I'm just going to sit around and scroll Facebook and binge watch Netflix. And so you have to gin up some kind of sense of, yeah, I can make a difference in people. And so you perpetuate this theory that, no, it's grassroots people who can make a difference.
Yeah.
That's kind of the cynic in me.
And that's what the people of power want the grassroots people to think, right? Because part of what enables them to get their agenda accomplished is their ability to manipulate the masses, right? And they are powerful and influential because they have their hands on the levers of social change, and we are kind of pawns in their game.
Yeah. Not to get too political, but this last election cycle, it was Hillary Clinton and the whole Democratic Party versus the grassroots people. And look who won. Bernie didn't.
Yeah.
So, I mean, that's like, like the cynic in me says, yep. That's what happens.
Yeah, if the grassroots thing really worked, Bernie would have gotten the nomination.
Correct.
Yeah. And it really wasn't close.
Not even close, yeah.
And he didn't have a chance.
Yeah.
No, even though most people probably on the Democratic side were like, yeah, let's go with him. It didn't matter, sadly.
Most people at the level of the individual voter.
Correct.
Yeah. No, that's a great example. Yeah.
Well, one objection to Hunter's thesis is, well, what about Jesus? I mean, didn't he emphasize this mustard seed approach, that the kingdom starts small and grows and gets big from there? Doesn't this conflict with the notion that it takes people of high positions of power to get things done? I mean, doesn't the Bible teach the opposite of this? Mm-hmm. What would be your response to that objection?
I would say yes, which illustrates why the biblical mission is not consistent with the mission, or the mission of the world at large. If the Bible teaches something different, I'm not surprised. And so that should force us to take a step back and go, okay, if the world is doing it through these powers, these elite people, high-profile people, well, that's the way the world does it. And maybe the kingdom methodology is different. But if the methodology is different, then maybe we should also be expecting different results. How do we define success? How do we define victory? I think that's a lot of it right there, that the gospel message teaches us to define success and define victory very differently.
Yeah, and not just the mustard seed. I mean, the whole Jesus and his disciples situation.
The underdog disciples.
Right, like that's who they are, and that's who they were the whole time. And, how do these unlearned men come before us and speak this way? Like, they're not supposed to be here. Like, no, they're the mighty ducks. Here they come. And so it definitely conflicts with that thesis of his.
Yeah, and I think the apparent contradiction happens with a little bit of slippage and substitution. I mean, what Jesus is doing is describing how the kingdom of God grows. Mm-hmm. Yeah. What he's doing by collecting these underdog disciples from underdog Israel is the formation of a people who are not like this world.
Exactly.
And whose contribution to this world is to reflect a kingdom that is not of this world.
Yep.
So to say, wait, that contradicts Jesus. No, Jesus never taught about how to change the world.
Exactly.
He never talked about how to change the Roman Empire or change Washington, right? Mm-hmm. He wasn't talking about how to get a fallen world to be a better version of itself.
Right.
Jesus' agenda was in the midst of a fallen world that operates with people of worldly power and influence, networks of elites, that's symptomatic of everything that's wrong with this world. Yeah. We're not going to put a Band-Aid on that we're not going to fix that and change that. What we're going to do is reveal the new world that God has opened up to us through Christ. Yeah. The kingdom of God that is a mustard seed growing up in this world, not to make this world better, but to replace this world. That the kingdom of, right. of Christ is replacing the kingdoms of this world, not revamping the kingdoms of this world to make them more like the kingdom of God.
Yeah. And I would think that when it comes to gaining ground, when God's kingdom is gaining ground, the kingdoms of this world don't even recognize it because they don't define gaining ground that way. Yes. So like they're going to look at it and go, you're not accomplishing anything because we define gaining ground by these criteria. And the kingdom of God is not meeting any of those criteria. And that's where I get really concerned when I see Christians who look at a Supreme Court nominee and then another Supreme Court nominee and go, oh, see, this is why we did this. We're gaining ground. Man, are we using the world's definitions for gaining ground? When we gain ground, the world goes, yeah, you've accomplished nothing. And we're like, oh, if you only knew. If you only knew.
And that kind of brings it full circle to the Trump quote about, if you don't, that's the beginning of everything you've gotten. Everything you've gained will be gone if we don't get the right people in. Like, really? The gift from God is gone?
Yeah, right.
Like, yeah.
Who we are in this world as new creations, that's gone? No, you're thinking of your influence in this world. Okay. And as Christians, that should be fine with us. Like, it's not great. I mean, we don't want this world to be full of immorality and people who don't care and love about each other, sure. But we haven't lost anything.
Exactly. And in fact, in the Bible, when God's people do things the nation's way, they lose everything they were hoping to gain. I think of the Israelites in Judges chapter 2, when the Israelites begin to pursue the policies of the nations around them, primarily in worshiping their gods, thinking, well, if we worship Baal, then Baal controls the rain. We need rain to water our crops. Let's do what the nations around us do. Let's worship Baal so that we can get the rain and we need to water our crops and have an abundance of food. Okay, you just went and you defined success. You defined gaining ground the way the nations around you define gaining ground. And maybe you do get the crops that you need. But what happened? God actively opposed them and gave them over to plunderers who came in and took their crops. Yeah. You end up not having what you wanted. And how often as Christians do we define victory or gaining ground according to the world's standards and end up losing everything we hope to gain? And don't even realize that we gain nothing with regard to what the kingdom says. This is what we want to gain.
Yeah. So the kingdom of God agenda might not be the same as the Washington agenda of the left or the right.
Exactly.
And I think Hunter's thesis is an interesting one because it points out how change really does happen in the world, and that's where the manatee illustration came in. The manatee, the state of affairs for the manatee is a much better place than it used to be because Hollywood and Washington and governing officials and celebrities and musicians came together and squeaked loud enough and consistently enough and through their political and their financial weight behind it to enact legislation that is preserving the fate of the manatee for another generation to enjoy in Florida or SeaWorld or wherever they can be held.
Yes, swimming with the manatees.
But this is how change happens in the world, and it's striking that it doesn't seem to be the way God is raising up Israel in the Old Testament, and it doesn't seem to be the kind of position he's putting the disciples in the New Testament. And it's not because God doesn't know what he's doing.
Right.
It's because the way he is positioning us throughout the entire Bible as his set-apart people is in such a way to accomplish the mission he's been given us, which is not to make the world a better place,
Right.
but to be the better place that God has made in this world through Christ. And that is part of the gospel message, that a new world has broken into this old fallen world and its ways, and we have a chance to be a part of that kingdom mission of Christ. So hopefully we're just kind of getting geared up and getting into the theme and some of the aspects of the theme that the book is all about. I look forward to exploring with you guys some of the possibilities and different ways people interact with the world in our next podcast. But for now, I think it's time for us to sign out.
I think you're right. It is. So, who's going to lead us off? Sam, you mess it up every time, so we're not going to give. Yeah, we're not going to give it to you.
That's fine. I'll sit over here in the corner and cry like a manatee. I don't know. That's the noise they make.
I have no idea. Do they make any noise
Thanks
at
for
all?
joining us in this week's episode of the After Class podcast because
We can't even do it. The best conversations happen
After class.